Good evening, and welcome to tonight's special session. Just chuckling at my really ridiculous outfit. I haven't had that much time to get ready, hence my intriguing outfit. And sorry about the lighting, particularly for Facebook users, which seems to be a little bit challenging. Um, but I'm quite liking the mushroomy gills that I'm wearing. Let me just show you that for people that can't see. Look, here I have a frill for a mushroom effect. And the headscarf is obviously trying to make me look a bit mushroomy. But yeah, I haven't been able to put in my usual amount of effort into going full theme with my dressing up. But anyway, here we are tonight going to talk about fungi in fiction and mushrooms, toadstools, any other types of fungi in fiction. And I would love to know if you have any favourite fungi in fiction. If so, please tell me whether you're on Instagram, Facebook, or any other means that you have of sending me a tweet, an email, or any other way of letting me know. I'd love to know your favourite fungi in fiction. Also, do let me know if anyone's having any trouble with sound or vision. I hope not. And it's great to be back. Last week I was away in Milan, very excitingly, doing a bibliotherapy conference. I flew to Milan and then travelled up to the north of Italy. There seems to be a helicopter going by right outside our window in a rather terrifying fashion. So I went to the north of Italy and I then delivered a bibliotherapy lecture in French, which was pretty amazing and exciting to do, and also quite terrifying as my French is not necessarily as fluent as it used to be in the good old days. So it's great to be back. It's half term, everything's a bit hectic, hence my being in a little bit of chaos and not quite managing to fully go for the dressing up. But thanks so much for joining me. Lovely to see people here, Lorraine and Imogen. Great to see some people on Facebook too. And do let me know, as I was saying before, if you've got any favourite mushrooms in fiction, beyond, of course, good old Alice in Wonderland. But before I get going talking about particular texts, I'm going to give you some fascinating fungal facts, which you might not know. Mushrooms are genetically closer to humans than plants, having their own genetic way, having gone their own genetic way 1300 years ago. 1300 million years ago. Not fully with it yet, but I'm going to be with you soon. Um, More than 80% of the earth under your feet is mycelium, which means fungus related. That's a pretty insane thought. The mushroom is the tip of the iceberg. It's the fruiting body of the mycelium. The fruiting body makes up less than 5% of the organism. The largest organism on the planet is a honey fungus, which is 2.4 miles across. That's quite an insane thought. The hardest natural material in nature is sporopollenin, which the mushroom spores are made of. Mushroom spores can survive the vacuum and radiation of space. So they're pretty damn hardy things, these mushrooms. The death cap is one of the most deadly organisms on Earth. They contain amatoxin. Once ingested, you've got no hope of recovery. Oh, Colleen, you've just told me that Facebook keeps cutting out. I'm really sorry about that. I wonder why that is. My signal seems to be pretty good. So I don't think I can do anything about that, but I do hope that it gets better your end. But do keep letting me know and I'll see if I should check my connection. Mushrooms taste good and they're free. That's another interesting fact. Not everyone might agree with me. And there's a lot of rather rather off-putting aspects about mushrooms, which do account for the reason that mushrooms have such a complicated relationship with us in literature. Mushrooms are not necessarily loved by all. They are quite often hated, reviled, and feared, as we will see in the mushrooms that we'll soon be discussing. Um, Colleen and Lorraine are both saying that Facebook has been glitchy. Sorry about that. That is weird, and I don't know why that's happening. But I hope you are rejoining me on Instagram. Hooray! Yes, you are. Great to see you, and thanks for coming. I actually think you do get a clearer vision on Instagram, which I don't understand why that is, but the picture seems to be better. Um, Another interesting fact about mushrooms is that the bright red and white mushrooms, which are the sort of classic toadstool pictures that you see, that you know, the lovely red ones with the little white spots all over them, which you often see in Disney films, and they're also the ones in the Super Mario Brothers, which in the game Super Mario Brothers cause you to grow in size. They are actually based on real mushrooms, as I'm sure you know, called Amanita muscaria. And they are slightly poisonous, not enough to shut down your vital organs, but enough to cause a loss of equilibrium. And if you eat the skin, it can make you feel larger or make the world feel large, which is a really interesting thought because that's what happens to Alice in Alice in Wonderland. When she eats part of the mushroom, she grows. And clearly, that was based on real experience that the author had probably messed around a bit with experimenting with mushrooms in his time. Apparently, magic mushrooms are the safest form of a drug that takes you into another state of mind. Oh, sorry, I'm just panicking there because I saw smoke. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but there was something smoky going on in my background. Um, that's how organised I am this evening. Something's on fire. I don't think it is in reality. I think we're okay, but just tell me if you see anything weird happening behind me, of things going up in flames. So, Colleen, you've said you've never seen the real ones. I have seen them. They're amazing, and they're actually to be found quite often in woods and forests. And I've seen some in woods in Hertfordshire, where I used to live, and quite a few people have been posting about them recently on Instagram. In Scotland, I've seen quite a few. So I haven't seen any near me in Sussex, but there's definitely a few around, and they are pretty amazing. Um, Also, tripping, when we're talking about using mushrooms for hallucinogens, which I was just telling you is one of the safest ways that you can have a hallucinogenic experience. Tripping is actually experiencing a hyperconnected brain. When you take mushrooms with psilocybin, which is the essential drug that makes you have that trippy experience, your brain stops communicating normally and communication starts occurring between brain regions that don't normally talk together. And this is something which many an author has explored in their fiction and we'll be talking about soon. This trippy experience can be a great way to change perspective, and it can aid in alleviating depression and dealing with PTSD. And there have been some people who have written books about that experience as well, which is something that I won't be touching on tonight, but is a fascinating area of research. More and more species of mushroom that glow in the dark are being discovered all the time, by the way. And as it stands at the moment, there are more than 75 species of mushroom that are bioluminescent. Has anyone seen any of them? Apparently, they're very common in Japan, and I've seen photos of them. I've never seen the real thing, unfortunately. Another fascinating fact is that there's a mushroom in Hawaii that, when smelled, causes instant orgasms in a woman. More than half of the female test subjects experienced a simultaneous orgasm. Now, that's a really interesting fact, and I wonder if they mean, were all the people being tested at the same time, and did they all have an orgasm at the same time? Or did they mean that the subjects had a simultaneous orgasm with when they tested the particular mushroom in Hawaii that has this orgasmic effect? Highly intriguing. And I wonder if any of you have had any such experiences. Laughing John, it's great to see you here this evening. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you're appreciating my very mushroomy outfit. I haven't had a lot of time to put it together, but look, gills. I've got gills. Um, Surely that's all I need to be a mushroom. So I was just talking about the mushrooms that are said to give you instant orgasms that come from Hawaii, which sounds pretty fascinating. And apparently, when men tried this particular mushroom, they said it just smelled awful and they really didn't like it. So it only seems to work for women, which is a bit unlucky for the men. Another fascinating fact about mushrooms is that mushrooms can actually create their own wind. So mushrooms need wind in order to spread their spores so that the spores will travel around their vicinity and more baby mushrooms will grow. But there's not necessarily always wind around. So mushrooms can create their own airflow around them by causing water to rapidly evaporate, thus creating a vehicle for spreading their spores around their environment. That's a pretty insane thought as well. All in all, mushrooms are pretty incredible, amazing, and wonderful living beings, which we should very much appreciate. Apparently, humans are not the only living creatures which enjoy the hallucinogenic effects of the mushroom. Reindeer are also known to occasionally eat mushrooms because they actually enjoy the trippy effect of the mushroom too. So that's quite an awesome thought as well. Now, before I move on to novels and fiction containing mushrooms, I'm going to read you a really beautiful poem by Sylvia Plath called Mushrooms, which I'm sure many of you will know, maybe from school days or from having discovered the joys of poetry later. But it is one of my favourite ever poems, and I'm just going to share it with you now. Written in 1959. Mushrooms. Overnight, very whitely, discreetly, very quietly, our toes, our noses take hold on the loam, acquire the air. Nobody sees us, stops us, betrays us. The small grains make room. Soft fists insist on heaving the needles, the leafy bedding, even the paving. Our hammers are rams, earless and eyeless, perfectly voiceless. Widen the crannies, shoulder through holes. We diet on water, on crumbs of shadow, bland mannered, asking little or nothing. So many of us, so many of us. We are shelves, we are tables, we are meek, we are edible. Nudgers and shovers in spite of ourselves, our kind multiplies. We shall by morning inherit the earth, our foot's in the door. Really, Sylvia Plath says it all, and you don't really need me to carry on talking about mushrooms because it's all in there. The amazing awesomeness of the mushroom. If you aren't familiar with that poem, I would say you should definitely get hold of a copy of it and put it up on a wall in your house because it's such an amazing poem and it does make you think about mushrooms in a whole new way. Is it just about mushrooms, we ask ourselves, or is it perhaps about women? It could be a metaphor for many things, and it's a great poem to study and ponder. Now, another very famous mushroom moment in the world of literature probably one of the most famous indeed, is that to be found in Alice in Wonderland, which is a wonderful book, which I'm sure that many of you go back to frequently in your lives. And I do love this edition. It's a really quite ancient and beautiful one from my childhood. And I'm just going to read you the section where Alice eats from the mushroom. Look, you can see there this really lovely illustration of Alice with a mushroom with the wonderful caterpillar on top, smoking his hookah. Hookah. The caterpillar was sitting on top of the mushroom with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah and taking not the smallest notice of her or of anything else. If I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. That is not said right, said Caterpillar. Not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice timidly. Some of the words have got altered. It is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar decidedly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. What size do you want to be? It asked. Oh, I'm not particular as to size, Alice hastily replied. Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know. I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She'd never been so much contradicted in all her life before, and she felt that she was losing her temper. Are you content now? Said the caterpillar. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar angrily, rearing itself upright as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. But I'm not used to it, pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone, and she thought to herself, I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar, and it put the hookah back into its mouth and began smoking again. This time Alice waited patiently until it chose to speak again. In a minute or two, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and yawned once or twice and shook itself. Then it got down off the mushroom and crawled away into the grass, merely remarking as it went, one side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter. One side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice to herself. Of the mushroom, said the caterpillar, just as if she'd asked it aloud, and in another moment it was out of sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which were the 2 sides of it, and as it was perfectly round, she found this a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched her arms around it as far as they would go, and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. And now which is which? She said to herself, and nibbled a bit of the right-hand bit to try the effect. The next moment she felt a violent blow beneath her chin. It had struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this very sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost, as she was thinking rapidly, so she set to work at once to eat some of the other bit. Her chin was pressed so closely against her foot that there was hardly room to open her mouth, but she did it at last and managed to swallow a morsel of the left-hand bit. I won't go on because you probably do know the story, I'd imagine, but look there at that amazing illustration of Alice when she's ridiculously tall and her neck has grown into a rather horrifying serpent-like shape. It is a really, I think, utterly brilliant description of what it is like to be experiencing hallucinogens, and I do feel that Lewis Carroll probably did know exactly what he was talking about. And I think, frankly, Alice in Wonderland is a brilliant place to start with fungal fiction. And Colleen is mentioning that Alice in Wonderland is one of her favourite books, which is excellent. And it is one to keep rereading, whatever age you are. So there's quite a lot of fantastic short stories which are about fungi and mushrooms. One of which is called The Voice in the Night by William Hope Hodgson, which was published back in 1907. And this story, in a way, sets the stage for future fungoid works by telling the tale of a shipwrecked man who stumbles upon an island an island covered in a thickening, spreading fungus, which slowly begins to grow on his skin and encase his whole body. This element of body horror, you could say, is standard for fungoid fiction in the fantasy world. I'm going to be talking mostly about more literary fiction, but there are quite a lot of amazing fantasy novels and sci-fi novels and short stories indeed, in which fungal affairs take a rather grim and hideous form when the fungi begin to take over people's bodies. And that is certainly the case in the story The Voice in the Night by William Hope Hodgson. A couple of more recent novels, which in a way take after that first fungal fiction, are a novel called The Beauty by Alia Whiteley and The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, which actually portray fungal contamination very differently. So The Beauty is a lyrical tale about a secluded village where all the female inhabitants have died and the graves of the women have sprouted a peculiar yellow fungus. The fungus begins to take the shape of faceless fungoid women, who the men of the village find both disgusting and also desirable. They lust after them despite their rather hideous appearance, and things get weird. The other one that's a recent interesting take on this idea is The Girl with All the Gifts, which was also made into a film. And I have to say, I did really enjoy the book. I found it pretty gripping by M.R. Carey. It's a great one, I'd say, to listen to on audio or to read. Could be described as a young adult book, but also great for readers of all ages. And that is a book in which there's been a fungoid infection which has caused, frankly, the end of the world as we know it, because anyone infected with this fungal infection becomes insatiably hungry for human flesh. So it does have a slightly hideous cannibalistic layer of interest to it. But what makes it really good is the girl who's the heroine is someone that we really like, and she too is infected by the fungal infection. And so she does unknowingly have a great desire to eat people, but she's been kept in a special institution where children are being experimented on to see if it's possible to wind back time and get over this fungal infection, which is turning everyone essentially into zombies. So it's kind of a zombie horror novel. But the girl she has an amazing IQ, she's genius level, and she is innocent of her plight. She doesn't realize that she has this great inner desire to eat people until, for various reasons, she discovers that it's the case. And we really root for her. We love her. She's really clever. She's obsessed with Greek myths. She's particularly obsessed with the Pandora myth. And the title of the book refers to that myth because she is the girl with all the gifts, which is actually what Pandora means. And I would really recommend it. It's a great read. And in a way, the fungal side of it is not the most important, though it does have great relevance to the ending of the novel, which I won't give away. So, yeah, that's The Girl with All the Gifts, and that's really good. Another few interesting stories which relate to such fungal infections, which is a particular route that one can go down in the world of fungal fiction, is Hayao Miyazaki's manga, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which deals with the fallout of an environmental catastrophe involving a toxic fungal takeover, rather like in The Girl with All the Gifts, threatening to end all human life. And in this story, it's actually a really great one that I believe has been made into a film, so you can find out more about that or read the graphic novel, which is also fantastic. Then another story where the landscape is altered by fungus is in Jeff Vandermeer's noir style novel Finch, which, rather than having a total desolation of the landscape, reads more like a fungoid occupation of the environment. Finch takes place in the city of Ambergris, and this is one of three novels that take place in that city, where the fungus slash humanoid species, the grey caps, have taken over and spread their influence across the city, which is quite sinister and all pretty exciting. It's not written in the most literary style, but it is a really interesting novel. Tracy, great to see you, if only for a few minutes, and it will be available to watch after. I'll put it on my YouTube channel, and I hope you're enjoying my mushroomy outfit. Thanks for appreciating that. Rather hastily put together, but very much in the mushroom vibe. And Tracy, do say if you have any favourite mushroom related novels, or indeed with toadstools. There's a few strands that we're going to go down. There's the fungal infections, which create dystopian novels. There's also fungi as a means of poison, which are great in detective novels. And then there's also the more artistic routes that you can go down with fungi in fiction. So if any come to mind, do tell me, because it is a rich theme, and I feel like there ought to be a book collating all the best mushroom related fiction ever written. Maybe if nobody knows of one, maybe I need to write it. So I was just talking about Finch, which is the novel set in the city Ambergris, which is all about a vast ruined metropolis where fungi are beginning to take over the world. And it's a kind of detective novel set against this strange apocalyptic background. Quite fun if you like those kind of scenarios which combine detective novels with an element of fantasy or sci-fi. Another one, so that one does have the kind of references to J.G. Ballard and William Burroughs. It's that kind of vibe. But another short story which I did really enjoy, with an interesting fungal reference, is The Purple Pilius by H.G. Wells, which is a story very typical H.G. Wells about a grumpy man who is quite unhappily married, and he has a really interesting relationship with his wife. It is a bit un-PC. It was written at least 100 years ago. H.G. Wells, he is a little bit misogynistic at times, it has to be said. But The Purple Pilius is a story about a man who goes out one day saying he's fed up with everything. He actually contemplates throwing himself in the canal. And he, sorry, Tracy, I've just seen your question. Where can I buy these orgasm mushrooms? Good question. They come from Hawaii, I do believe. So I'm going to investigate. If I find out, I'll put it here on Facebook. So going back to H.G. Wells, he takes, so he's feeling suicidal, he's really miserable, he hates his life, he hates his wife, his business is going down the pan. And while he's looking at the canal and wondering what to do, and wondering whether to throw himself in, he catches sight of these interesting mushrooms by the side of the canal. And very randomly, for no good reason, he decides to nibble a little bit of the mushroom, and he immediately feels an amazing sense of well-being. And actually, there's a lot of mushrooms in fiction that seem to give you a sense of well-being and also um, sexual desire. It seems to be a common theme, and I don't know if that is true to life in the world of mushrooms. If anyone has personal experience, do let me know. And he feels incredibly energized and full of joy and positivity. And he goes back to his wife and his house feeling far more excited about everything. And then his wife thinks he's gone completely mad because he looks really kind of wide-eyed and clearly probably off his head. His pupils have expanded to a terrifyingly large degree. So she is actually quite horrible to him. He is horrible back to her, and they have this really bizarre altercation. But it does actually change both of their lives for the better in a way that I won't reveal because I don't want to totally give away the plot. But it is a really interesting and quite odd story. So that's The Purple Pilius. I will write all of these down. There's other sci-fi authors, including Ray Bradbury and John Wyndham, have also written stories in which fungi appear in menacing forms, and I'm going to have to come back to them another day because there's actually too many to talk about. There's an exciting novel also called I is for Innocent by Robin Kirk. Sorry, I is for Innocent, which is actually by Sue Grafton, which features the deadly poisonous death cap. There's quite a lot of poisonous fungi to be found in detective fiction because they are a great way of slyly killing someone off without anyone realizing. And then I was also going to mention Robin Kirk, who has fun with a mold that produces a mind altering drug in a novel called Acceptable Risk, which is, in a nutshell, all about uh, briefly, the plot's about 20 years ago, humanity was infected by a variant of the fungus native to South America, which led to the end of civilization as it was before, a little bit like in The Girl with All the Gifts. The infected, oh, hang on, this seems to be, I'm getting confused now about which bit I'm reading from. Sorry, I think I've gone back to The Girl with All the Gifts, which I was talking about earlier, so sorry about that. Here's the bit about acceptable risk. Sorry to confuse you. So Acceptable Risk by Robin Kirk begins with the Salem witch trials of 1692, where Elizabeth Stuart is prosecuted on suspicions of being a witch. This occurs because witnesses see children behaving strangely after eating rye bread. These things that people get executed for are ridiculous. She is executed despite the pleas of her husband, and that's the end of that story. But 300 years later, the Stuart family fortune is inherited by Kimberly Stuart, a nurse, and she comes back to the old family house where this terrible scene occurred, where Elizabeth was eventually murdered as a witch. And when Elizabeth Stuart goes back to this house on a casual visit to Salem, she finds in the basement of the old house a new strain of a kind of fungus called the Claviceps purpurea, which induces a great sense of calmness, sexual drive, and confidence, rather like in the H.G. Wells story. Then uh, she and her husband immediately assemble a team and start working on developing a new drug based on this fungus. And the people start taking the drug themselves, which then means that rather strange things happen in the world of Salem 300 years after the witch trials. So that's a pretty intriguing and bizarre story involving mushrooms once again. So hang on a minute, I seem to be slightly losing my track on my pieces of paper. But I'm going to move on to The Man Who Died, which is a modern novel by Antti Tuomainen, who's a Finnish writer. And this novel you may not have heard of, but it was a massive bestseller in Finland and has done moderately well in the UK as well, because it's a kind of detective novel, but also with a lot of humour and literary qualities. It's called The Man Who Died. And this is a story that involves the Finnish mushroom industry, which is instantly gripping. And it's all about the hero, who's a 37-year-old mushroom entrepreneur, Jaakko Kunisma, who basically is working in his mushroom industry and suddenly discovers when he goes to see a doctor that someone has been slowly poisoning him for the last few years, and that he therefore only has a few months to live. And this causes him to completely reassess his whole life and his business, and to wonder what it's all for and what he really wants to do with the rest of his short life that's left. So it's called The Man Who Died. The whole book is leading up to his death once he discovers that he's doomed. And it is a really fascinating insight into the mushroom industry in Finland, as well as being a really great read that is pretty gripping and based on a detective novel trope. Another novel that owes much to mushrooms in a way that I've only just read and which I really loved is called Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski, which is quite a short novella, really, set in Poland in 1980. And it's about the anxious, disillusioned Ludwig Glowacki, who is soon to graduate from university. He's been sent along with the rest of his class to an agricultural camp. And here he meets Janusz, and together they spend a dreamlike summer swimming in secluded lakes, reading forbidden books, and falling in love. So it's about the discovery that the two boys are gay in the 1980s in Poland, when that was completely illegal. And it's all about living under the communist regime in Poland. And it's actually pretty dark and alarming, quite a lot of it. And it's also incredibly sad to read about their romance being completely kept under wraps. But there's a really important scene in the book where the two boys are hanging out with some of the ruling people of the time who did have access to paperwork to get you abroad if you wanted to go abroad. And they all have soup which is clearly full of hallucinogenic mushrooms. And because they drink this soup, they have a very overpowering experience which has a dramatic effect on everyone's lives. And I won't tell you what happens, but it is a really interesting scene, and it's a major plot point in the book, and it's all about the mushrooms. So that is a really good book, which I would hugely recommend to you all. It's called Swimming in the Dark. Another one, which I very much love, which is a very important mushroom related book, is The Debt to Pleasure by John Lancaster, which purports to be a recipe book, but of a very different kind, because it has many different scenes which are described in great detail, each one relating to a different recipe. And it's beautifully written, and it does have some very important mushrooms in it towards the end. I'm just going to read you a bit of it to give you a little flavour of the loveliness of the writing. This is from the preface. It says, "Preface, acknowledgement, and a note on structure. This is not a commercial cookbook. Though I should straight away attach a disclaimer to my disclaimer and say that I have nothing but the highest regard for the traditional collection of recipes arranged by ingredient under broad, usually geographical categories. One of the charms of the genre is that it places an admirably high premium on accuracy. The omission of a single word or a single instruction can inflict a humiliating fiasco on the unsuspecting home cook. Which of us has not completed a recipe to the letter, only to look down and see, lying unused by the side of the saute pan, a recriminatory pile of chopped onions? One early disaster of my brother's, making a doomed attempt to impress some hapless love object, was occasioned by the absence of the small word plucked. He removed from the oven a roasted but full-fledged pheasant, terrible in its hot sarcophagus of feathers. I love that phrase, hot sarcophagus of feathers. And it is actually a really awful, tragic image. And actually quite funny too. Laughing John is saying Mushroom by Can is a great tune. Thank you for that. Yeah, I do actually really wish I could put music on these live sessions, and I probably could if I just got my technology a little bit more 21st century. So maybe I'll try that next time, and I will look that up. I was also thinking of that fantastic tune which is about Alice in Wonderland. One bite makes you larger and one bite makes you small. I can't remember who it's by. Jefferson Airplane it's by, and it's a really fantastic song. So I'm just going to read you another little bit from this book by John Lancaster. Koki, fantastic to see you here. Thanks for joining me. I've been talking about various different types of fungi in literature, going from the more detective-like novels where fungi play an important role, and also the slightly fantasy type ones, such as Girl with All the Gifts, where fungi take over humanity and turn them into something slightly different. But I'm now talking about this very beautiful book by John Lancaster, which does have a sinister side, and it is kind of pretending to be a recipe book, but is actually a really excellent and rather gripping novel, because you slowly realize as you go through the book that something sinister is happening. So this bit that I'm going to read to you is towards the end of the book, and I won't give away what happens, but I just love the scene. The walk took about 20 minutes. Mushroom hunting is an agreeable mixture of the active and the contemplative. On the one hand is the fresh air, the promise of the early day, the walk, the sudden bends and stoops. On the other, the intellectual activity of identification and of what military strategists, in one of these euphemisms which often seem more compellingly sanguinary than the term it replaces, call target acquisition. The atmosphere was described with a false jollity by Tolstoy and Anna Karenina. In truth, it involves an anxious concentration on one's own performance or on it. A silent, free-floating mixture of boredom and anxiety of the sort familiar to hunters and psychoanalysts. So much looking down can induce a vertigo when one finally looks up and realizes where one is, who one is. Comically, on this occasion, I straightway came across a robust clump of seps under the first two trees I examined. Mr. Roberts would have been doing very well indeed if he'd found anything remotely comparable. I enjoyed one of the pleasures of mycology, a brief, silent, rapturous gloat. On a different day, with a different purpose, I would have been delighted to find my mission accomplished so rapidly. I might even have shared some of my harvest with Pierre and Jean-Luc. Not today, though. I pressed on. At the edge of the clump, I found a patch of Entaloma sinuatum, the toxic field mushroom look-alike, known as Le Grand Empoisonnière de la Côte d'Or, not a fungus you often see in the United Kingdom. Again, I pressed on. I found what I was looking for, almost exactly where I had thought I would. So that is an excellent read. I'd really recommend that. The Debt to Pleasure by John Lancaster. which does have a very important mushroom scene in it. And generally, it is a great novel. Um, but that scene did make me wonder, are any of you going out there and picking mushrooms at the moment? Have you dared to do it? Have you found any? And do you know what you're doing when you do so? I have been looking. I've seen quite a lot of amazing mushrooms around us in the fields, but I'm a bit too scared, I'm sad to say. But I used to go picking mushrooms with my dad in the dawn when we lived in Suffolk when I was about 12. He always insisted we had to get up at 5:30 for some reason best known to himself, and we would go forth and find mushrooms on this race course that was near to where we lived, and they were fantastic. And we went home and cooked them, and he was always very confident about them. But I'm just a bit too scared because I don't really know which ones you can eat and which ones might be lookalikes, which are really poisonous. Um, if anyone is an expert, I'd love to know. So I'm now just going to tell you a little bit about some non-fiction about mushrooms, because there are some really superb non-fiction books about fungi and mushrooms. This is a book that I have mentioned before on one of my earlier sessions, because it is a really wonderful book to read, simply about the glorious interconnectedness of life. It's by a writer called Merlin Sheldrake. It's a beautiful book, and it's quite an intellectual one, it has to be said. It's not an easy read, but it is a book you can pick up and flick through and almost always find something instantly accessible and incredibly interesting. And I'm going to read you a little bit of it so that you get an idea of how fascinating it is. And it is one that I'd urge anyone who's really interested in fungi to read, because that is quite frankly what it's all about. It's a dense and really interesting tome. And by the way, it also does have rather nice little illustrations here and there and photos. So I'm just going to read you a little bit from the introduction, which is subtitled, "What is it like to be a fungus?" There are moments in moist love when heaven is jealous of what we on earth can do. That's by Hafiz. Fungi are everywhere, but they are easy to miss. They are inside you and around you. They sustain you and all that you depend on. As you read these words, fungi are changing the way that life happens, as they have done for more than 1 billion years. They are eating rock, making soil, digesting pollutants, nourishing and killing plants, surviving in space, inducing visions, producing food, making medicines, manipulating animal behavior, and influencing the composition of the Earth's atmosphere. Fungi provide a key to understanding the planet on which we live and the ways we think, feel, and behave. Yet, they live their lives largely hidden from view, and more than 90% of their species remain undocumented. The more we learn about fungi, the less makes sense without them. Fungi make up one of life's kingdoms, as broad and busy a category as animals or plants. Microscopic yeasts are fungi, as are the sprawling networks of honey fungi, or Armillaria, which are among the largest organisms in the world. Remember at the beginning I was telling you the biggest organism in the world is 2.4 miles wide, and that is a honey fungi. The current record holder, now he's going to tell us too, in Oregon, weighs hundreds of tons, spills across 10 square kilometers, and is somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 years old. There are probably many larger, older specimens that remain undiscovered. Many of the most dramatic events on Earth have been and continue to be a result of fungal activity. Plants only made it out of the water around 500 million years ago because of their collaboration with fungi, which served as their root systems for tens of billions of years until plants could evolve their own. Today, over 90% of plants depend on mycorrhizal fungi from the Greek word for fungus, myces, and root, rhiza, which can link trees in shared networks, sometimes referred to as the wood wide web. This ancient association gave rise to all recognizable life on land, the future of which depends on the continued ability of plants and fungi to form healthy relationships. So that gives you an idea of the erudition and enthusiasm that Merlin Sheldrake has for his subject of fungi. And I'll just read you a tiny bit more, which is when he's beginning to talk about, I think, hallucinogenic effects of fungi, because he does go into that as well. But it's a book which answers all the questions that he was just talking about that I just read to you. So it really does bear reading the whole thing. You just might want to do it slowly. Fungi, too, trick us out of our preconceptions. Their lives and behaviours are startling. The more I've studied fungi, the more my expectations have loosened and the more familiar concepts have started to appear unfamiliar. Two fast-growing fields of biological inquiry have helped me both navigate these states of surprise and provide frameworks that have guided my exploration of the fungal world. The first is a growing awareness of the many sophisticated problem-solving behaviours that have evolved in brainless organisms outside the animal kingdom. The best-known examples are slime moulds, such as Fusarium polycephalum, though they are amoebae, not fungi, as true moulds are. As we'll see, slime moulds have no monopoly on brainless problem solving, but they're easy to study and have become poster organisms that have opened up new avenues of research. Fusarium form exploratory networks made of tentacle-like veins and have no central nervous system or anything that resembles one. Yet they can make decisions by comparing a range of possible courses of action and can find the shortest path between 2 points in a labyrinth. Japanese researchers released slime moulds into petri dishes modelled on the Greater Tokyo area. Oat flakes marked major urban hubs, and bright lights represented obstacles such as mountains. Slime moulds don't like light. After a day, the slime mould had found the most efficient route between the oats, emanating into a network almost identical to Tokyo's existing rail network. In similar experiments, slime moulds have recreated the motorway network of the United States and the network of Roman roads in Central Europe. A slime mould enthusiast told me about a test he had performed. He frequently got lost in IKEA stores and would spend many minutes trying to find the exit. He decided to challenge his slime moulds with the same problem and built a maze based on the floor plan of his local IKEA. Sure enough, without any signs or staff to direct them, the slime mould soon found the shortest path to the exit. You see, he said with a laugh, they're cleverer than me. So sorry, that wasn't about hallucinogenic effects. It was actually about how slime molds can find their way around IKEA, which is pretty awesome and amazing, and just shows you some of the incredible stories within this book, which I would very much recommend. I'm just going to tell you about a few other non-fiction books about fungi before we come to an end. So, Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World by Paul Stamets is about an introduction to all things mushroom. It's an entertaining and profound meditation on the importance of fungi to human society. So that's called Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World. Not the most sexy title, it has to be said. But it is a really interesting book, and by all accounts, it's a fascinating read. Then we've got Entangled Life, which I've just been talking about, and which I do think is brilliant and know from personal experience. Then there's The Mushroom Hunters, On the Trail of an Underground America by Langdon Cook. So for American watchers, this could be great for you. And in this book, The Mushroom Hunters, food writer Langdon Cook draws his reader into the world of mushroom foraging. Cook's travelogue charts out prime mushroom locations and tells the stories of the foragers he meets along the way. In the process, he also shows how mushroom foraging is a multi-million-dollar business. So that's a really fascinating book to read, not just for people in America, but maybe more helpful because it might help you to find the places you want to go to get your mushrooms. Colleen, you're commenting that you're curious about the differences of why some mushrooms are poisonous and some are not. And I think quite a few of these non-fiction books do tackle that. There's one called Mushrooms Demystified by David Arora, which is 1,000 pages long, which is the definitive guide to finding and foraging for mushrooms. And this is one that would tell you how to avoid poisonous ones. It's packed with handy picking tips, witty anecdotes, and very thorough classification guides. So that's a great one. That's called Mushrooms Demystified. I'm sorry I don't have all these books to show you. I wish I did. Then there's Mushroom, A Global History by Cynthia Bertelson. A History of Mushrooms, which is part of the University of Chicago Press's excellent edible book series. Though this is another one which would be great for if you want to know which ones you can eat and which ones you can't. Cynthia Bertelson's brief account of the fruiting fungi reveals how mushrooms have been intertwined with religious practices, developments in agriculture and medicine, and conflicts between rival states. So it's also very much about mushrooms as food. Koki's also commenting that her kids are picking mushrooms and she's very alarmed by it, as would I be, I have to say. And I just don't know if there are any fail-safe methods of knowing which ones are poisonous or not. But I do think in England, in the UK, we don't have that many poisonous mushrooms in reality. So I think generally it's fairly safe in the UK anyway. Let's hope. So then we got another one called Microphilia, Revelations from the Weird World of Mushrooms by Eugenia Bone. This is a love letter to the fungal world and the mushroom foraging community. Having served as president of the New York Mycological Society, Bone knows this community intimately. So her book details the gamut of foragers from amateur enthusiasts out on the trails to the hardcore finders who are part of the commercial industry. She provides a social history of mushroom use in cooking and medicine. So that's really a fascinating book. Then we got The Way Through the Woods on Mushrooms and Mourning by Longlit Woon, this sounds brilliant. I can't claim to have read it myself, but I love the sound of it. This is about grief and mushroom foraging. So after 32 years of marriage, Long's husband suddenly passed away. Lost in a world of grief, she enrolled in a foraging course, a decision which changed the direction of her life. The Way Through the Woods captures Long's journey with loss, as well as how mushrooming helped her reconnect with the world. At the heart of the memoir is the conviction that engaging with mushrooms and the natural world can be a radically transformative experience. So that sounds brilliant as well. Then finally, on the non-fiction front, we have Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World, an identification guide by Paul Stamets. So this one provides an authoritative guide to psychoactive fungi, complete with visual and biological information on over 100 species. So this is all about psychoactive fungi, which is a really big topic in the world of fungi at the moment, as more and more people are experimenting with ways that psychoactive fungi can be used as a means of treating depression, PTSD, and suicidal tendencies. Throughout the guide, Paul Stamets carefully explains how to forage responsibly for these special mushrooms and which poisonous lookalikes to avoid. Additionally, he discusses how ancient cultures around the world used these mushrooms as well as modern day practices. If you're looking for a great trip, Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World is your book. Um, so that would be a fun one to read as well. And on that merry note, I will end tonight's lovely discussion about fabulous fungi in fiction. And I'll be back next week, feeling like maybe a spooky evening might be nice as it's Halloween in between. So I'm going to be thinking about some spooky stories to bring you next week. And in the meantime, have a lovely time. If you are going to go and pick any mushrooms, be very careful. Make sure that you go armed with lots of good books to help you find which ones are the best, or maybe just read about them instead and play it safe. Read some of those brilliant novels and short stories that I've been mentioning. I will post a list of all the books that I've mentioned this evening. I will go in search of those orgasm mushrooms and let you know if I find a source for them. And I will see you again next week. Have a lovely time meanwhile and happy reading. Good night.